The following is an AZPM original production.
Hello and welcome to the press room from AZPM. I'm your host, Steve Goldstein. Our distinguished panel of guests today include Paola Rodriguez of AZPM, Carolina Cuellar of AZ Luminaria, and Paul Ingram of the Tucson Sentinel. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here for the discussion. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Paola, probably the biggest statewide story this week is this idea that as we're getting ever closer to printing ballots for November's election, there are potentially about 97,000 Arizonans who could be disenfranchised. What's the problem that was discovered?
Yeah, so within state systems, they found that people who obtained their Arizona driver's license before 1996 and then maybe received a replacement in the mid-2000s may not be able to vote via a full ballot this upcoming election.
As I said, the timing is really great on this. I mean, couldn't be worse.
They needed to send out ballots to overseas voters yesterday, and from my knowledge, Arizona voters who want to do a mail-in vote those are sent out October 9th. So, the decision for this has to be on how to figure out what to do moving forward, has to be figured out fairly soon.
And Paul, there's a complication here that Arizona has, and I believe the only state that has this. There's a Fed-only ballot, and then there's a so-called full ballot. How does that complicate everything here?
Yeah, it really complicates things. What it means is that people who get federal-only ballots, it's usually given to people who haven't proved to the state that they have their citizenship. They do have citizenship, for some reason the state doesn't have that. So you get a federal-only ballot. And what that means is you can vote for president, you can vote for Senate, you can vote for House, but you can't vote for state legislatures and you can't vote for the propositions. So it changes the kind of ballot that people are going to get. And this glitch, as they're putting it, which I think is a good way to put it, it really kind of creates like a loophole. There's people who just haven't shown that they're citizens. They almost likely are, and should be able to vote. But if they get this different kind of ballot, it maybe changes the election. That's one of the reasons you see, Republicans and Democrats really kind of pushing towards making sure they can vote. But there's kind of a situation between the Maricopa County Recorder and the Arizona Secretary of State, who are ended up in opposite sides of this, which creates a kind of strange bedfellows situation, because you have the Arizona GOP really being against their own county recorder.
I want to dig in on that a little bit more, but Carolina, that's an interesting thing here too, because when we hear so much, of course, as elections come up, who are the people who are not actually citizens? There is this assumption made often by one party, and this looks like many people in the GOP are, in fact, they could be affected by that. And then, so that's, again, creating strange bedfellows, as Paul said.
Yeah, so the people primarily affected by this glitch or loophole are actually Republicans. And so you're seeing that the RNC is actually supporting the admittance of a full ballot to these people, like we were saying, like oddly against sort of what they have been doing before with voter ID laws and such. And also maybe a little bit of a schism within the GOP as well, like the Republican County Recorder of Maricopa County has said that they think that they should only be able to vote on a federal ballot. So I think that's sort of an interesting turn that we've seen. Well,
and interesting, too, that the state GOP chair, Gina Swoboda, against strange bedfellows, is agreeing with Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, a very prominent Democrat. So that's caused some complexities for people, too, right?
Definitely.
Just the perception is odd. Paola, what do you make of that? The fact that we have Stephen Richer and Adrian Fontes, who, yes, are in different political parties, but they've been working together to make sure that people trust our elections. I mean, is there a possibility this is going to create more stir, that people are going to say, well, see, I told you we couldn't trust how they do these things, because here's a mess up that no one can even imagine?
I think for the last 4 years, a lot of election officials across the country have been working really diligently to make sure that, people can regain trust within these elections. And so I think, this coming a couple weeks before mail-in ballots are supposed to be coming out, it can create, more skepticism within what's going on, and what we see come from this will say a lot about what voters are thinking for this election.
Yeah, Paul, the skepticism can become dangerous, as we've seen with all the election denials we've seen over the past couple of cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that every mistake or problem or issue that a county recorder will have becomes really magnified. It becomes magnified just in the state, but also across the nation. I mean, you see people who are on social media who are, really, really criticizing the system and saying, hey, that's why you can't trust these elections. But the reality is that the Maricopa County Recorder are the ones who discovered this glitch and also announced that they had a glitch and are looking for ways to fix it. So they're having to go to the courts and make an argument about how this needs to be fixed, but so that there's a structure of law in place so that we understand why people are going to do this. And the one thing too is since the 2020 election, the 2022 election, there's been lots and lots of people who've said the elections are flawed. And one of the reasons that they're, can't be trusted is because there's all these people who are, immigrants, especially illegal immigrants who are voting in it. And the reality is there's only a tiny, tiny of votes that are done by people who are immigrants in the country illegally, and even fewer that are done by people who don't have authorization to be in the community. So we see how much of that is driven by this accusation that doesn't exist, and that ends up magnifying problems that do exist but are getting fixed by people who are trying to do their jobs well.
Yeah, Carolina, one of the important points I think Paul makes is this idea that there are complaints and concerns by certain folks about how elections have been run, and yet even though it's getting close, as I mentioned, to sending out the ballots, isn't it better that the problem was discovered now rather than in November?
I think another really interesting element of this is, for example, I interviewed a lot of voters during the primaries, and a majority of the people who voted in person were Republican. And some of the issues they're most worried about is voter confidence. And it's interesting to see their own party sort of backing this initiative. And I'm very curious to see how that affects their perception of voter sanctity and the integrity of our voting system.
Paola, bigger picture, has there been discussion about how this problem could be solved? I know there are lawsuits that they want to have the state Supreme Court kind of decided, but is there potentially a solution at play here?
From what I've seen from state Supreme Court rulings and from what is being argued within the state is that Fontes and GOP leaders are asking the state Supreme Court to allow for these voters to have full access to the ballot. Will that happen? That's still up in the courts to decide, but yeah.
Yeah. And Paul, we're coming up on a very fast deadline here, so something has to be decided quite soon.
Yeah. Really, the deadline is essentially now. They have to get the mail-in ballots, the ones for people across the world, people who are in the military, et cetera. And then, we're not that many days away from October 9th, and that's when ballots for everyone get mailed out. So, yeah, clock's ticking.
Well, and finally, just not strong opinions from any of you, but do you think that when things like this happen, and Caroline, let me start with you. The idea that a problem was discovered in part related to the MVD, this is, instead of many of the things where a solution in search of a problem, this actually could be something, hopefully people will get together on this. Can we anticipate that before the next cycle, before 2026 at least?
But I really think it's going to depend on how this plays out.
Okay. Paola, what do you think?
This is definitely going to garner more support to making sure that elections are accessible to all voters that should have access to this. And so how that depends and how that will work out. Again, I think I'm going to agree with Catalina on how this situation will be handled. But I think it's worth noting that, this isn't a new issue. It's been going on for 20 years. It's spanned over four administrations. So how it will be solved, that's to come.
Paul, final thoughts on that?
That's a great point. It's something that's been around in the system for decades. It's a kind of long-term problem. So discovering it now is a good thing. They're actually going to fix up something that they didn't know about. And I think it's important to note that it's a glitch. It's a bug. It doesn't mean that there's people who don't have citizenship. It just means that the MVD hasn't confirmed their citizenship. Mm-hmm. So, we have to be pretty clear, I think, about that, is that most of these voters are eligible voters. Who should get a chance to vote in the full ballot, and unless it's a quirk of the law, I could see the state Supreme Court pushing it. They're going to make sure that people can do their vote the way that they should be.
Indeed. Okay. Mm-hmm. Paul, let's move on to our next topic. State Senator Justine Wadsack was in court earlier this week for a criminal speeding ticket for allegedly going more than twice the legal speed limit in Tucson in March on Speedway, which, driving up from Phoenix to come to AZPM, I'm using Speedway, so I'm hoping Senator Wadsack was not there at the same time. She entered a not guilty plea, so she'll go to trial next month. Let's do a little bit of background on this story. Senator Wadsack has attempted initially at the moment to invoke legislative immunity without sending us into the constitutional bowels somewhere. Can we discuss what legislative immunity actually means?
Yeah, I mean, in short, legislative immunity is given to people who are in the state legislature, so are, Arizona senators and House members. And the idea really is that it's to keep people from, say, pulling over somebody and holding them so they can't make a vote. And really, it's just to give them a kind of temporary immunity. It's important then to note it's temporary. It's not a permanent immunity. It only exists while the legislature is in session. So the minute that ends, it's, the bill is going to come due. And over the years, there was different cases that have sort of narrowed this. There were legislators who were going 100, 120 miles an hour through Phoenix, and the reality is that, the state legislature itself has said, you know what, that's not reasonable. And so, but what it means for Justine Wadsack is it means that when she was pulled over, she immediately told the police officer, who was a Tucson police officer, that she was a senator, and essentially, kind of already getting to the point of, hey, I'm immune to this. And, it's important. The police officer didn't entirely know what to do. So he said, hang on, and he went and he called his sergeant, and he talked to his sergeant, and they got some legal advice from the county attorney, and he let her go. He essentially cited and released her, but he didn't actually cite her at the time. The citation had to wait until after the legislature was out of session. So, which meant that since there was a delay, it meant that a lieutenant who worked for the Tucson Police Department actually called her to let her know, hey, we're going to cite you. I need to give this to you. And that call, let me put it this way, didn't go very well.
Yeah, Carolina, that caused some complications as well, because whether Senator Wadsack didn't actually know the fact that after the legislative session she was still up for these charges, that did cause some issues where she and her attorney trying to make this political.
Right. So she is claiming that this is a politically motivated, attack. And I think that's cost her a lot in terms of the endorsement from the police union, as well as who knows the impact that it had on her reelection, that she lost by 4%.
Right, to Vince Leach there. So Paola, I'm especially interested though in phone calls that were threatened, at least, by Justine Wadsack's attorney, trying to get depositions from Mayor Romero and also the police chief as well. I mean, they're really up in the ante here, aren't they?
I mean, yeah, you can see Justine Wadsack earlier this week was on social media saying that she wants to put on the stand, Mayor Romero, the police chief, and, all saying that, again, this is politically motivated. Whether that's possible, I don't know about that, but I think she is saying that, this is a way for them to go back on their political opponents. And yeah.
And I presume there's no evidence of this. She's just sort of making accusations that it's political.
Yes.
Okay. Paul, I kind of want to get a little bit of background on, for those people who do not cover or follow Southern Arizona politics very much, or they've just heard of Justine Wadsack from certain things at the state legislature.
Sure.
What should we know about her and where she came from before she served in the legislature? Does she have an interesting backstory?
I mean, a bit. She played in a band. She did some other things. She was kind of around for a while. She was involved.
Well, what kind of band, I should ask? Because that'll really give us.
I think it was when it was an '80s cover band, I believe.
Oof. Okay.
So, she in part got involved in some of the early kind of stuff against the vaccines for COVID-19. And then 2 years ago, she really got in the political scene. She came in and she primaried Vince Leach, who's in the district, of course, that she's in. It's kind of a rangy district that kind of runs across northern Tucson, goes up towards the Catalinas, and she managed to win and beat Vince Leach and got him out of office. And then I can't remember if she had a Democratic opponent or not. But anyway, the point being is she went into legislature, and she was really pushed hard on legislation against students who might be trans, who are in state schools, and she was pretty controversial. She pushed really hard on these things, and and was facing not only a primary again from Vince Leach, but she's facing a Democratic opponent as well. But she didn't make it through the primary. And, it's hard to say. I mean, Leach came back with a lot of fire. He really pushed hard to, overturn the last election to come back. So it's hard to say about how much this particular thing unmoored her, but, it certainly didn't help. It lost her, as Carolina said, it lost her the Fraternal Order of Police endorsement, and that kind of embattled her, and she ended up losing. So she's not going to be in the state legislature no matter what next year.
Yeah. Carolina, anything else stand out to you about Senator Wadsack as far as how she was as a lawmaker? There is a perception, I say this as someone who spends a lot of time in Maricopa County, that there's a surprise that someone as conservative, especially anti-vax sort of thing, that someone like Senator Wadsack would have won election in the first place. Anything else stand out to you about her specifically?
Well, I spoke to her briefly at the GOP watch party for the primaries, and it really stood out to me how distrustful she is of the system. I actually asked her about sort of the polling and how she feels about how that's going, and she said that it was all invalid, that it is not something to be believed, and that she was going to wait until the results came out. So I feel like this is pretty in line with sort of the narratives that she normally tells of, you know, having distrust in the institutions and feeling persecuted politically, especially by a lot of entities in the state.
Yeah, Paola, it seems interesting that for a speeding ticket, and I know she was going twice the legal limit, that this is going to trial. So it seems like she's trying to make some sort of point here. Maybe it's the political stuff we already discussed, but this seems like a big deal to go to trial for it. It seems like there must be, and I'm not casting aspersions, but there must be something more to it than just I'm fighting a speeding ticket.
I think this is maybe about, you know, making sure that she's like trying to, how do I put this? You know, what this narrative that she keeps pushing on political persecution. I think in Paul Ingram's reporting, I saw that there was a lot of conversation about the differences between persecution and prosecution, right? And in this case, maybe prosecution is the better fit word for this in terms of what the city is doing towards this case.
Okay. Paul, I won't hold you to this, of course, even though we're recording this. Do you expect her to have a political future?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, you know, right now, the way that some people in the Arizona GOP are operating, she probably does. You know, we see people who have lost elections who still keep coming back. I mean, Carrie Lake being a good example of somebody, she lost her election and, you know, she lost her election for governor. She's still suing over her possibility to become governor again. Yeah. Meanwhile, she's running a Senate campaign. So, yeah, I mean, I think that we probably haven't seen the last of Justine Wadsack. You know, it's important in the way that she's framing this is that she's talking about this as an idea of lawfare, or the idea of warfare by law. And, you know, she invoked in some of her social media, she really invoked the idea that like talking about the people who I want to say, I can't think of the phrase, but who not endorsed, but they signed for President Trump in 2020. The idea that they were the electors. They signed that they were the electors, and of course they're facing prosecution. And she really made those two things, compared those two things together. That she's being persecuted, that the law is being used against her as a way of political warfare or lawfare.
So not to belabor this, but Carolina, that's why I come back again to the speeding ticket. The fake electors. You know, I mean, that's been shot down by judges all across the country. This is a speeding ticket. So I'm just confused as to one trying to quantify that. That's why I don't know how to ask the question, but it does seem like those are not weighed equally.
Oh, I see. Like sort of like that disparity in severity, like seemingly. You know, I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't want to ask any of you to psychoanalyze. It just struck me as sort of strange. Paola, let's move on to our next topic, which is by a 3-2 vote, Pima County Supervisors decided to invite Sheriff Nanos to speak with them about an internal investigation into a sexual assault case. The first question I wanted to ask about that is, didn't the Arizona Attorney General's office clear the sheriff's office on this particular charge?
Well, they said that they didn't find any criminal wrongdoing, but they did find 4 potential policy violations, and that spans from, you know, how command staff are potentially neglecting their duty to aid other departmental members exposed to danger, failure of an off-duty officer to act in an official capacity, and other things, as well as improper documentation and reporting requirements. So,
okay. So, Carolyn, let me ask you this, because Sheriff Nanos has a competitive election coming up. Any thoughts? Has there been any buzz about how he feels about being called before the supervisors? Is there concern that this could affect his electoral chances?
I think he himself has said that he feels it's a politically motivated situation. He stands by his investigation, and I know right now he's going under criminal proceedings and doesn't want to talk publicly. Even with the Board of Supervisors, he's said that he will only speak in executive session while his criminal case is ongoing.
But if I have my numbers right, though, the supervisors are from the same party as Sheriff Nanos, the majority at least, right? So it was a 3-2 vote to go, and I think at least 2 Democrats were on the side of going forward with it. So that is, so to make it political again seems a little bit risky from that standpoint, considering he's running for re-election.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Paul, let's get a little bit of background on this. Who is former Sergeant Ricardo Garcia. How closely aligned with Sheriff Nanos was he?
I mean, he's part of Nanos's kind of group. He's part of the command staff.
Inner circle kind of thing?
Inner circle. Yeah, that's a better phrase for it. The inner circle of Nanos, and part of the command staff that he really put in place after he beat Mark Napier for sheriff in 2020. So, that over time, the question really is what happened that night, and also how did command staff react to what happened that night, not only in the immediate moments, but kind of in the aftermath to it. And so, there's been lots of questions. There's a group of sheriff's deputies who have been very critical of how Nanos and his command staff behaved that night. And, to be clear, and I think it's important, Nanos wasn't there. Nanos wasn't there. He wasn't involved. He wasn't involved in some of the decisions. The question is really about all the people beneath him who are part of the command staff of the Pima County Sheriff's Department and how they behaved during this incident. Ricky Garcia, of course, faces a criminal indictment. He's going to go to trial later in December. And, the Sheriff's Department also faces a lawsuit from the victim who is suing the department for $900,000. So there's several things happening at once. In 2003, September of 2023,
Okay.
Sharon Bronson, it was kind of one of her last acts as the Democratic chair, was the one who asked for an investigation, into what the department had done. And so that investigation, as Paula noted, that one is done, but there's still, hasn't been an internal affairs investigation yet. And Nanos has said that he has not done that because he wants to protect the criminal case against Ricky Garcia. So there's several.
Has the sheriff defended Garcia, though?
Has he defended Garcia in particular? No.
Okay.
No, but I think he's been more defensive about his command staff and the decisions that they made. And he's been more critical of the people who have come with complaints, saying in one case that one person has inserted himself into the case. Nanos at one point said that there were lots of people who were actually trying to look at the case, and and he sanctioned some of them for actually trying to look at the case on their computer system and internally, saying basically they didn't have a need to know and they shouldn't have been looking at it.
Okay. I have to ask another electoral question. I apologize for being such a political junkie. Paola, let me go to you on this, though. Sheriff Nanos' challenger is Heather Lappin, a woman. Does something like this coming up in any way, the fact that a sexual assault case may have been mishandled, does that in fact raise other red flags for people who are, in fact are against Sheriff Nanos? Can they say, okay, well, maybe he doesn't have this sensitivity to a situation that involved a female who was allegedly assaulted?
That's a good question. I think in regard to this, Heather Lappin has also garnered support from, Pima County Supervisor like Matt Hines, right? And so in this case, when it comes to cases like sexual assault, gender can play a factor into this, but will it? We'll see that happen at the polls.
Carolina, I'm not sure you had a chance to watch the recent debate, and I don't have it right in front of me, obviously, as far as the words go. Do you recall at all whether Heather Lappin brought up this issue at all? I don't recall whether she brought up how Sheriff Nanos had handled this.
I don't recall.
Okay.
She did.
Okay.
She did. Yeah, she did. And it was Nanos used that to shot back to a criticism of Lappin about how she handled a training issue. So, that was a pretty heady debate because they both went after each other pretty personally. It wasn't about just the department, but also how both of them have behaved with, in particular cases. Certainly that's become the thing that happened with Ricky Garcia has become a major part of the election. On Tuesday, Dr. Richard Carmona had a press conference along with the Pima County Deputies Organization, and it really critical about how Nanos is running the department. And it's important to note that Richard Carmona also did the same thing in 2016. He came out and criticized Nanos, and Nanos lost his election to Mark Napier.
Okay, let's spend the last couple minutes of our conversation on what is one of only two competitive congressional races in Arizona, and that is Juan Ciscomani defending against Kirsten Engel. They took each other on a couple of years ago. Carolina, one thing that happened this week, March for Our Lives endorsed Kirsten Engel over Juan Ciscomani. This is a very close race. Anything standing out to you about how this race has been run so far?
I know that gun reform is a big part of the Democratic platform. I know that when the rally happened, that was a big talking point from Doug Emhoff, especially here. We had Moms Demand Action present. As we know, they have a close connection to the shooting that happened in Tucson. A lot of them were victims themselves. But yeah, no, nothing particularly stands out. I just know that it's a big issue that will affect the decisions of a lot of voters, especially on the Democrat side.
Paola, considering that has been a Democratic issue as high up as Senator Mark Kelly as well, is the endorsement impactful in some way as far as this race goes?
That can be determined, I think, voter per voter, but I think it's worth noting that seat was held by former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who was a victim from the shooting that happened in Tucson, and other gun violence prevention groups like her own Giffords have endorsed Ingle. And so whether this is a determining endorsement, I think, again, you could that decision could be that could change voter per voter. So
yeah, Paul, it looks to be a close race, maybe not as close as it was 2 years ago, but is that the type of issue? I mean, we talk about all the time whether endorsements matter or not. Is that the kind of endorsement that matters, or is it kind of predictable?
I mean, at this point, I think it's a little bit predictable. You do see that, the people who want something to be done about guns, something to be done about gun control, it really has become a Democratic thing. Well, the Republicans really push the idea of that the Second Amendment is sacrosanct, and that you really can't do anything about guns. Meanwhile, of course, there's been all the school shootings. I mean, it's important to note, like with that, Giffords, of course, was shot. One of her aides, Ron Barber, was wounded in that same thing, and he became the representative for that district for a short time, and then he lost to Martha McSally. So we see that district just swings back and forth. I think regardless of who endorses on gun control legislation.
Okay. That's all for this edition of The Press from AZPM. Thanks to our guest Paul Ingram of the Tucson Sentinel, Paola Rodriguez of AZPM, Carolina Cuellar of AZ Luminaria. Thank you all for being here, and thanks you very much for joining us as well.